San Francisco is under siege. Hidden beneath the fog and bustle of everyday life, exotic flora has rained down from outer space. Nearly invisible and seemingly innocuous, this alien contagion has created unusual seed pods that bear a deadly secret. They reproduce and destroy all life forms they come across, including human beings. Two employees of the State Health Department, Matthew Bennell and Elizabeth Driscoll, must do whatever they can to fight this secret incursion, but can they hold on to their humanity long enough to warn the rest of the world? Will they stop the invasion, or will their bodies be snatched? In the late 70s, Philip Kaufman, after making headlines for being fired as the director of The Outlaw Josie Wales, was given the opportunity to helm a remake of 1956's science fiction classic, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Kaufman, who lived in San Francisco, was a science fiction enthusiast and a fan of the original film, and he saw the potential to reimagine the story from a more modern and more urban perspective. He wanted to see if he could inject pod people paranoia into a city he loved for being so progressive and full of life. With a modest budget of $3.5 million and a generous amount of creative freedom given by producer Robert Solo, Kaufman decided to film entirely on location with a very small crew. Having had previous success with documentary-style shooting in 1974's The White Dawn, Kaufman used a guerrilla filmmaking approach that utilized hidden cameras, real buildings, and handheld cinematography to capture a candid, objective view of the city. At the same time, he worked closely with lead cinematographer Michael Chapman, a veteran of the Godfather films, to mimic a film noir style with heavy use of shadow and chiaroscuro, alongside creepy, unusual lighting to give this naturalistic film a spooky, surreal edge. From a filmmaking perspective, this is one of the most interesting things about Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The classic Hollywood rulebook is tossed out the window, as subjects are framed slightly askew, photographed through fogged glass, the glistening spiderwebs of a broken windshield, and irrationally placed funhouse-style mirrors. Dutch tilts and experimental long shots are everywhere, and the camera is crammed into tiny rooms with too many people in them in order to recreate the unnerving claustrophobia of life in a big city. Whereas Jack Finney's original novel and the original movie concentrated on turning homey, small-town Americana into something subtly menacing, this film tries to do the same in an urban environment, and it does it in an ingenious way. It doesn't try to fake it. There are many genuine, unstaged shots of San Francisco that, in context, are uncomfortable, weird, and sinister. But for anyone living in the city on an average day, they would appear completely normal and uninteresting. A garbage truck collecting trash, faces peering out of a city bus, a police officer rushing by in a motorcycle, etc. These are ordinary things made extraordinary, giving us a view of San Francisco that is as unnerving as it is honest. Personally speaking, as someone who feels more comfortable in a small-town setting than in a major metropolitan area, this feels legitimately disturbing. This is exactly how I feel when I find myself having to deal with big city life.
No.
We're synchronized on all aspects.
You actually seen anything?
We don't want to create a panic.
We have the primary authority in this matter.
Extremely cautious.
Also important in lending the movie its uniquely unsettling atmosphere are the sound design and musical score. The sounds, conceived and created by sound editor Ben Burt, begin the film with a broad spectrum of natural and artificial noises. Birds chirp and children laugh as trucks backfire and construction crews bang away. Gradually, though, as the film progresses, the natural sounds fade away, leaving only the man-made industrial sounds, hinting at the fact that life has been replaced by artifice. The musical score is equally interesting. Composed by San Francisco jazz musician and professor of psychiatry Denny Zeitlin, in what would be his only film score, it's safe to say the music in 1978's Invasion of the Body Snatchers is distinct and impossible to replicate. Zeitlin used both his love of syncopated rhythms and human psychology to create something unexpected that digs through your eardrums and settles under your skin. Granted, it does occasionally get carried away with itself, but with its avant-garde, experimental nature, it creates a mood that is exceptionally well suited to Kaufman's vision. Fun fact on the subject of the film's music, the banjo tunes being played by a homeless man outside Bennell's office were actually recorded by none other than Jerry Garcia. Despite showing far more of the pods and transformations, the special effects budget was surprisingly small. Kaufman knew how to be economical. For instance, the aliens, as they are seen in their primordial gelatinous form at the film's introduction, were created using a $5 to $12 jar of something he found in a local art store. While there were a few days where multiple hours of makeup work were required to create the potification scenes, even the makeup was relatively inexpensive, despite looking incredible. There's some far more subtle makeup effects like flaky, dried skin and chapped lips, something achieved by withholding makeup rather than applying it, that work really well despite being very simple. For shots of plant-like tentacles reaching out to grasp at victims, Kaufman's big trick was simply shooting the film in reverse. With the money he saved by being thrifty with the effects and not having to build or dress many sets, Kaufman was able to hire a star-studded cast. For the lead of Matthew Bonnell, he turned to Donald Sutherland, an actor who had just returned from a long stint in Europe working for auteurs like Fellini. For Elizabeth Driscoll, he cast Brooke Adams, who was a successful television actress who made a big splash in 1978 with Days of Heaven. Kaufman, who had done some preliminary work for Paramount in developing the first Star Trek film, was keen on getting Leonard Nimoy into one of his films, and so he cast him against type as Dr. Kibner, who is, in this iteration of the story, a pop psychologist specializing in irrational, unconventional shock therapy. For the secondary roles of the Belichiks, he brought in a young Jeff Goldblum, a few years past his breakthrough performance in Woody Allen's Annie Hall, and child star turned successful adult actress Veronica Cartwright, who got her start in television shows like Leave It to Beaver and films like Hitchcock's The Birds, and would, a year after Invasion of the Body Snatchers, go on to appear in Ridley Scott's Alien. There are also loads of fun little cameos in the film, with Kaufman himself, his wife, and his brother-in-law appearing in minor roles. Also appearing are the film's cinematographer Michael Chapman, the original film's director Don Siegel, and of course Dr. Bonnell himself, Kevin McCarthy, in one of my favorite movie cameos of all time. One particularly low-key cameo happens right at the beginning of the film, with Robert Duvall creepily appearing on a swing while wearing a priest's robe. This cameo happened by pure chance, according to Kaufman, because Duvall just happened to be in San Francisco at the time of shooting and agreed to do it for free, even though the crew did buy him a nice jacket for the favor. While the script stays surprisingly true to Daniel Mainwaring's original screenplay, there are some key differences, above and beyond the altered setting. Probably the biggest change is to the main character, now named Matthew instead of Miles Bonnell. Matthew Bonnell is not and doesn't appear to ever have been married, nor has Miss Driscoll. Their relationship this time is, on a surface level, quite different, with Matthew being Elizabeth's boss at the health department. They have a warm and platonic friendship, though it is obvious from the start that Matthew has an unrequited love for her, despite a significant age difference and the fact that she is involved with another man. Matthew Bonnell has a cynical side, but he doesn't seem terribly broken. Instead, he is portrayed as someone longing for human connection, but who finds it difficult and awkward due to the nature of his job and his quirky, sometimes dorky demeanor. He spends his time cooking, something Donald Sutherland excelled at in real life, and collecting odd newspaper clippings, a trait he seems to have inherited from the novel's version of Jack Belichick. As for Elizabeth Driscoll, she seems largely content, though there are strains in her relationship with her boyfriend Jeffrey, even before he is turned into a pod person very early in the film. She seems mostly oblivious to Matthew's feelings for her, at least until the two are brought much closer over the course of the story. Whereas the novel and the original film are heavily focused on how people deal with divorce, this movie is more interested in, as Kaufman puts it, quote, trying to show the struggles of human beings in a world that is intent on becoming inhuman, unquote. There are intentional political undercurrents to the story this time around, but they are kept deliberately vague and essentially timeless. However, Kaufman has recently gone on record as stating that they are even more important today than they were when he made the film. The story still leans heavily on the malignant appeal of giving up individuality as a way to find peace in a chaotic existence, and thus, it invites many interpretations, few of which can be definitively shot down as untrue. In other words, you could argue that it's about communism. And this time, you wouldn't be completely off base. I doubt, though, given Kaufman's political leanings, that this is what he was going for. Another key change is in the film's conclusion. Here is my obligatory spoiler warning for a 40-year-old movie you probably already know the ending to. After Elizabeth is body snatched, like she is in the original movie but not in the book, Matthew runs over to a makeshift farm nearby where the pod people are growing pods en masse. Here, Matthew commits a brazen act of sabotage to try to fight the invasion, which is something he does in the book but not the original movie. And even though it feels relatively pointless in the grand scheme of things, it offers a kind of emotional catharsis for the character and audience before the film moves into its infamous denouement. Before I talk about that, though, I just want to point out that Donald Sutherland did his own stunts, even though, according to the film's stunt coordinator, Sutherland is one of the clumsiest men alive. Note how he's walking up on this gantry, and note that there wasn't a net beneath him. Though he escaped the film unscathed, the same cannot be said for this overenthusiastic extra, who was lucky to have survived. While there are many things about this film that separate it from the other adaptations, even the original, the cherry on the top has got to be the ending, which is hands down the best out of all of them. Adamant about not repeating the mistake of the predecessor by having a studio-mandated book-ending story attached to the film in reshoots to lessen the impact of its bleak final shot, Kaufman very carefully avoided telling anyone about it, including most of the cast and crew and especially the studio heads, until the last possible moment. Even for the 70s, an era in which Hollywood was more accepting of downer endings, it's pretty daring to end the film with the protagonist turning into a pod person. But for a story that is earnestly trying to shake up its audience to remain vigilant against what the pods represent, it's a brutally effective trick. Philip Kaufman's Invasion of the Body Snatchers released during the Christmas weekend of 1978 to a fairly good domestic box office gross of about $25 million. While some critics praised the film for its bold directing and paranoid atmosphere, other critics, most notably Roger Ebert, lambasted it as schlocky, pretentious, and muddled. Ebert would go on to call 1993's abysmal Body Snatchers the best version of the story, so he obviously had a screw loose when it comes to body snatcher films. Today, Kaufman's film has a much warmer critical consensus, with a Rotten Tomatoes score in the high 90s, a place on many lists of greatest science fiction/horror films of all time, and a lasting reputation as easily one of the best film remakes ever made. Even though I have plenty of love to give to the original, and even some warm feelings about 2007's The Invasion, despite what I may have suggested in my previous video, I believe it is by far the best version of the story. If you can only watch or read one, you should absolutely make it this one. And that's all for today, fellow Earthlings. If you like what I'm doing here, give this video a like, and please don't forget to subscribe to see more. You can find reviews of several science fiction classics on my website at emcgill.com, and I'll put links to my reviews of Jack Finney's Body Snatchers and all 4 films based on it in the description. Until next time, this is The Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, as long as you're not hurting anybody.
Take some.
What are they?
Speed, it'll keep us awake.
How many are you supposed to take?
It says take 1.
Take 5.